mountain range hidden under the middle of the Atlantic with more than 170 peaks that no map had ever shown. A secret river of cold water moving more than 7 kilometers beneath the surface, quietly deciding the temperature of an entire ocean. And a submarine built like a string of titanium beads designed to sit silently on the seafloor, right next to the wires that hold the modern world together. None of that is what anyone expected to find at the bottom of the Atlantic. For most of human history, we assumed there was nothing down there at all. Just cold and pressure and emptiness. So let's go down and look, because the deeper you go, the stranger this story becomes, and at a certain depth, the line between science and something far colder begins to disappear. Let's start with what people believed. For thousands of years, the deep ocean was the single largest unexplored space on Earth, and almost everyone assumed it was a desert, a flat, lifeless plain of mud. No light reaches it. The weight of the water above is crushing. It seemed obvious that nothing could live there and nothing interesting could be hiding there. That assumption held until astonishingly recently. The entire field of modern oceanography is only about 150 years old. The first real scientific voyage to map the world's oceans set out in 1872 on a British warship called HMS Challenger and spent 4 years dragging instruments across the sea floor. It found things nobody had predicted. It found one of the deepest places on the planet, a trench in the Pacific where the bottom sits more than 8 kilometers down. And as the ship crossed the Atlantic, its measurements revealed something rising out of the middle of the ocean floor, a swelling, a ridge running down the center of the sea. Then, on the 7th of March, 1873, the dredge came up with a strange catch. Scattered across the deck were peculiar black, oval lumps, almost pure manganese oxide, formed by the sea itself over millions of years. Nobody knew what they meant. It would take another century before anyone realized the deep ocean floor was carpeted with mineral wealth. That was the state of knowledge. A blank map with a ridge sketched faintly down the middle and a handful of black stones nobody could explain. The deep Atlantic was a mystery that almost no one was willing to spend the money and the lives to solve. Almost no one. Because while the rest of the world looked up at space, the Soviet Union decided to go down, and what they pulled up from the bottom of the Atlantic rewrote the map entirely. It began in 1972. That year, Soviet scientists launched the first serious expeditions to study the living resources above the underwater ridge that the Challenger had glimpsed a century earlier. It is called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and it runs through the ocean between Iceland and the Azores, a chain of drowned volcanic mountains hidden 1,000 meters and more beneath the waves. Over the next 3 decades, the Soviet Union and then Russia would send 76 separate research and exploratory expeditions into this one stretch of water. 76. This was not a glance. This was an obsession. And the first thing they found was the mountains themselves. Mapping the ridge in the years between 1972 and 1984, they counted more than 170 seamounts, individual volcanic peaks rising to within 1,500 meters of the surface. An entire mountain range, taller and more complex than most of the ranges on dry land, completely invisible from above. To picture it, imagine the Alps. Now sink them so deep that the highest summit still has the height of 4 Eiffel Towers of black water stacked on top of it. That is what was sitting under the shipping lanes the whole time, and barely anyone had ever seen it. But the mountains were not the discovery. The discovery was what lived on them. When the Soviet vessels lowered their gear over these peaks, the instruments came back showing dense concentrations of life. Not a scattering. Swarms. Fish gathered in commercial quantities over the slopes, a deep-water creature called the round-nosed grenadier, and another called Alfonsino, and orange ruffy, and black scabbard fish, and tusk, and cardinal fish, and deep-water sharks, and crab. In total, across the whole area, Russian scientists catalogued 143 species from 67 different families of animal. The full count of fish species in these waters runs past 200. This was a desert with cities in it. And the Soviets did not just study it, they harvested it. Commercial fishing on the seamounts of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge began in 1973, and over the following decades, Russian vessels pulled more than 200,000 tons of fish out of these hidden mountains. The deep Atlantic, the place everyone had written off as empty, turned out to be one of the richest secret larders on the planet. And the fish were not the only fortune. Remember those strange black lumps the Challenger had hauled up back in 1873? A century of study revealed that the floor and the slopes of the deep ocean are studded with mineral riches, not just the manganese nodules scattered across the open plains, but deposits of metal-rich rock built up by the ridge itself along its volcanic spine. The Russians studied these polymetallic deposits in the heart of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge for the better part of 40 years, and in 2012 they signed a formal contract with the international body that governs the seabed, claiming the right to explore their own patch of the bottom of the Atlantic. So the picture kept filling in. A hidden range of volcanic mountains, swarms of fish in commercial quantities, and, threaded through the rock itself, the makings of a mine. Further north, a separate Russian fishery had found vast shoals of redfish in the open water of the Irminger Sea. By some estimates, a standing population well over 1.5 million tons, an entire economy swimming in water that, on the old maps, had been left blank. And then they did something that almost no one else was doing at the time. They went down to watch. In expeditions during 1983, 1986, and 1988, the Soviets deployed an underwater vehicle called the Seva-2, lowering it more than 60 times into the black water around the seamounts. For the first time, human eyes looked directly at these bottom-dwelling swarms, watched how the fish behaved, and measured how thickly they gathered. The data was, in the dry words of the official record, unique. No one had ever collected anything like it. By the time the work was published, it filled 340 scientific papers. So far, this sounds like a story about fish. It isn't, because the deeper the Russian scientists looked, the less the water itself behaved the way it was supposed to. And that is where this gets strange. Here is the part nobody expected. The Soviets had gone looking for fish, and in the process, they had started mapping the water, its temperature, its chemistry, the way it moved. And the water near the bottom of the Atlantic was not still. It was flowing. The ridge they had charted sits on the eastern edge of a vast rotating system of currents, where the warm North Atlantic Current and the Irminger Current collide with cold water sliding down from the Labrador Sea. Where these waters meet the underwater mountains, they are forced upward in great plumes called upwellings, dragging nutrients up from the deep, and that is why the fish were there in the first place. The mountains were not just rock, they were stirring the entire ocean. But the truly remarkable discovery about the moving water came later, and it came from a different group of Russian scientists entirely. Researchers from the Shirshov Institute of Oceanology, part of the Russian Academy of Sciences, were studying the deepest depressions of the Atlantic trenches in the seafloor, more than 7,800 meters down. And down there, in the absolute dark, they found a current that no one knew existed. It was a river of cold water flowing along the very bottom of the ocean. This water is born near Antarctica, at the opposite end of the world. It is so cold and so dense that it sinks all the way to the sea floor and then crawls northward across the equator, filling the deepest pits of the Atlantic and carrying that chill thousands of kilometers up into the northern hemisphere. The Russian scientists discovered that this hidden current is what sets the temperature of the bottom water across an enormous stretch of the northeast Atlantic. A single, silent, invisible flow, deciding the climate of a region the size of a continent. For a sense of why that matters, you have to understand what this current is part of. It is one strand of a global system that scientists call the ocean conveyor belt, the slow circulation that carries heat and carbon around the entire planet and shapes the weather on every coastline. And here is the unsettling part. When researchers measured this Antarctic bottom water carefully, they found that its northward flow had weakened by around 12% in just 2 decades, between the years 2000 and 2020. The deepest, oldest, most ignored water on Earth is slowing down. And it is connected to everything above it. So this was the real picture the Russians had assembled by the turn of the century. The bottom of the Atlantic was not empty. It was a hidden mountain range, swarming with life, sitting in a current system that helped run the climate of the world. It was, in every sense, valuable. And that is exactly the moment when the science quietly stopped being only science. Because there is a second answer to the question of what Russia found at the bottom of the Atlantic, and it has very little to do with fish. To understand the turn this story takes, you have to follow the expertise. For decades, Russia had been building something almost no other nation possessed, the ability to send machines and people deeper than anyone else, to see in the dark, to work on the seafloor under crushing pressure. That ability had been used to count grenadier and map currents. But the same skill that lets you study the bottom of the ocean lets you reach the bottom of the ocean. And somewhere along the way, a part of the Russian state decided that the deep sea was not just a place to do research, it was a place to fight. The organization at the center of this is so secretive that most people have never heard its name. It is called the Main Directorate of Deep Sea Research in Russian, abbreviated to GUGI. On paper, it studies the ocean. In reality, it is one of the most secret branches of the entire Russian military. It does not answer to the ordinary navy. It reports directly to the Minister of Defense and, by some accounts, to the President himself. Its headquarters sit in St. Petersburg, but its operational base is far to the north, on the Kola Peninsula, in the same waters that hold Russia's strategic nuclear submarine fleet. Its origins reach back into the Cold War, somewhere around 1965, with its present form taking shape in the mid-1970s. And what GUGI can do is extraordinary. It operates submarines capable of reaching 6,000 meters down, deep enough to touch almost any part of the ocean floor on Earth. It controls a fleet of more than 50 ships, submarines, and floating dry docks, some of them built specifically to hide other submarines from satellites passing overhead. Its publicly stated tasks include maintaining Russia's own network of underwater sensors, installing motion detectors on the seabed, and recovering lost equipment from the bottom of the sea. But its tasks also include 2 words that change the entire meaning of the rest: eavesdrop and sever. GUGI is built, among other things, to listen in on the fiber optic cables that cross the ocean floor and to cut them. And cutting is only the most dramatic of its tools. The Directorate's smaller craft battery-powered titanium submersibles, named Rus and Konsul, each carrying a crew of 3 down to around 6,000 meters, have also been used to take samples from the seabed in the Arctic, helping Russia argue that vast stretches of the ocean floor are an extension of its own continental shelf. Read that again. The same fleet that can sever a cable is being used to claim ownership of the bottom of the sea itself, to map it, to mine it, to fight over it, and to draw new borders across a place that, until very recently, no human map even bothered to fill in. Now, officially, the ships that do this work are oceanographic research vessels. They carry sensors, they map the seabed, they take samples, and that explanation makes sense. It is exactly what you would expect a research program to look like. It is also not the whole truth because no civilian research fleet on Earth needs the ability to reach a cable in international waters at the dead of night and quietly cut it in 2. So who ran this directorate? And what were they reaching for? For 15 years, from 2005 until his death in November 2020, GUGI was commanded by a vice admiral named Alexei Borilechev. a man so central to the program that, after he died of complications from the coronavirus, the Russians named a brand new spy ship after him. His successor took over in early 2021. But to understand what these men were actually building down in the dark, you have to meet the strangest submarine that has ever been put to sea. Its name is Losharyk, and almost nothing about it is normal. Start with the shape. A normal submarine is a single long tube, because a tube is the simplest shape that resists pressure. Losharyk is not a tube. Its pressure hull is believed to be made of up to 7 separate titanium spheres linked together in a row like beads on a string. There is a reason for this. A sphere is the strongest possible shape against pressure from every direction at once, and titanium is one of the strongest materials you can build a hull from. String enough titanium spheres together and you get a vessel that can go almost unimaginably deep down to around 6,000 meters into pressures that would crush an ordinary submarine like a drink can. The cost is that there is barely any room inside for the crew to live. This is not a vessel built for comfort. It is built to go to the bottom and work there. The name itself tells you how secret it is. Russia has released almost no official information about this submarine. One of the clearest photographs that exists of it was apparently taken by accident during a television photo shoot. Its crews nicknamed it Losharyk after a character from an old Soviet cartoon, a little toy horse made entirely of small spheres, because that is exactly what the submarine looks like. NATO has its own name for it, NORSUB 5, and in at least one United States military briefing, it was referred to in colder language still a dark target, something to be watched. It was laid down in 1988, but the collapse of the Soviet Union and a lack of money meant it was not actually launched until August of 2003. For years it operated in near total silence. And then, on the 1st of July 2019, the world got a brief, terrible glimpse of what it was doing down there. That day, Losharyk was deep beneath the surface at a depth of around 300 meters, taking measurements of the sea floor in Russian territorial waters. And in its battery compartment, something went catastrophically wrong. Investigators later concluded that the fire began with a massive explosion in the batteries. The crew fought it. They could not put it out fast enough. 14 men died, killed by smoke and toxic fumes in the cramped titanium spheres. And here is the detail that has haunted analysts ever since. Of those 14 dead, 7 held the rank of Captain First Rank, one of the most senior ranks in the Navy. 2 of them had been awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation, the country's highest honor. To grasp how abnormal that is, compare it to the loss of the submarine Kursk, one of the worst disasters in Russian naval history. The Kursk went down with 118 men aboard, and only 2 of them were captains first rank. Losharyk was a far smaller vessel, and it was carrying 7. You do not put that much rank and that many decorated heroes on one tiny submarine for a routine survey. The conclusion many drew was simple and chilling. Whatever Losharyk was doing on the bottom that day, it was something extraordinarily sensitive, or it was testing something entirely new. There was one more uneasy detail buried in the investigation. Losharyk had originally been designed to run on silver-zinc batteries built in Ukraine. After relations between Russia and Ukraine collapsed over the war in the Donbass, those batteries were swapped out for lithium-ion units from a St. Petersburg manufacturer, and it was in the battery compartment that the fire began. Fishermen near the surface that evening later reported seeing a submarine rise up out of the water at speed and meet a waiting Navy ship and 2 tugs. Whatever had happened down there, it had been bad enough to abandon the mission and run for the light. The titanium spheres, remarkably, survived the fire intact. The submarine was towed home and slowly rebuilt, but whatever Losharyk was built to do, it cannot do it alone. It is too small, too slow, too short-range to cross an ocean by itself. To reach a target far away, it has to ride inside something much, much bigger. This is where the program becomes almost difficult to believe. To carry their tiny, deep-diving submarines across the world unseen, the Russians took some of the largest submarines ever constructed and rebuilt them into motherships. They took old strategic missile submarines vessels, originally designed to end the world, pulled out the missile tubes, and lengthened the hulls to create a hidden bay on the underside, a garage on the belly of the submarine, where a smaller craft like Lozherik can dock and be carried, completely concealed from any satellite, to anywhere in the ocean. The first of these conversions were old Delta-class missile boats. A submarine called Orenburg, rebuilt from a Delta III, and another called Podmoskovye, rebuilt from a Delta IV and delivered in 2016. In each case, the engineers cut out the section that had once held nuclear missiles and replaced it with a long mission compartment and a docking cradle on the underside of the hull, purpose-built to clamp a tiny, deep-diving submarine to the belly of a giant. From above, on a satellite image, it is just another large submarine going quietly about its business. What it is actually carrying, no one watching from orbit can see. The most formidable of these is a vessel called Belgorod. It started life as a giant Oscar-class cruise missile submarine, one of the biggest classes of submarine in the world, and beginning in 2012, it was rebuilt for this secret role. Delivered to the Russian Navy in July of 2022, Belgorod can carry Lozherik tucked beneath it, but it can also carry something else, something we will come back to. And that second purpose has earned it a grim nickname in the West, the Doomsday Submarine. And the Russians are not stopping. A second carrier submarine, called Khabarovsk, has been under construction at a shipyard on the White Sea since its keel was laid in 2014, reported to be in its final stages by 2024. And in March of 2024, at a yard in St. Petersburg, the Russians laid the keel of something even stranger, a tiny new titanium submarine called Sergei Bavelin, only a few meters long, which its designers claim will be able to dive to 11,000 meters. Stop and think about that number. The deepest point in any ocean on Earth is around 11,000 meters. They are building a machine to reach the very bottom of the world. It was designed by the Kurchatov Institute, the same storied scientific establishment that once stood at the heart of the Soviet atomic program and built at a yard that has turned out a whole generation of Russia's deep-sea machines. Its mothership, when it is finished, will most likely be that new spy ship named after the late Admiral Berilichev. A vessel only a few meters long, riding on the back of a larger ship, built to descend to the deepest trench on Earth and do work there that its makers will not describe. That is the shape of Russia's ambition in the deep. Smaller, quieter, deeper, and harder to see with every passing year. But a submarine that can touch the deepest floor of the planet is only worth building if there is something down there worth reaching. And there is. It is not gold, it is not oil, it is 600 thin lines lying in the dark, and they are the reason for everything you have just heard. This is the treasure at the bottom of the Atlantic, not minerals, cables. The entire modern world runs on a network of undersea cables that almost no one ever thinks about. According to the most recent surveys, there are nearly 600 undersea cable systems in operation around the world, stretching across roughly 1.5 million kilometers of seafloor. And those cables carry more than 99% of all international data traffic on the planet. Not most of it, almost all of it. The satellites overhead, the wireless signals in the air, they are a rounding error. When your money crosses an ocean, when a continent talks to another continent, it goes down a cable resting on the bottom of the sea. To make this concrete, look at a single country. More than 90% of the United Kingdom's day-to-day internet traffic travels through these undersea cables. Around 60 of them come ashore at quiet, discreet points along the British coast. And the value moving through them is almost beyond comprehension by one Royal Navy estimate. The cables between Britain and the United States alone carry something on the order of $7 trillion in financial transactions every single day. Alongside them run the pipelines, gas lines like the Langold pipeline, more than 1,000 kilometers long, which is part of why around 77% of Britain's gas imports flow up from Norway across the floor of the North Sea. And it is not only data. Increasingly, the seabed carries power and fuel as well. Stretched across the floor of the North Sea and the Baltic are the great electrical arteries of modern Europe. Interconnectors like Viking Link, the longest subsea power cable in the world, running 765 kilometers between Britain and Denmark, and the lines that wire the Baltic states into their neighbors across open water. Alongside them run the gas pipelines, including the Nord Stream lines to Germany and the smaller connectors that feed Poland and the Baltic. Cut the right cable and a country goes dark. Cut the right pipeline and it goes cold. All of it lies on the bottom, undefended, in the same black water Russia has spent 50 years learning how to reach. Now here is the thing that should make you uneasy. These cables are not armored fortresses. Out in the deep ocean, many of them are no thicker than a hose. They lie on the bottom, largely undefended, exactly where any vessel that knows how to reach the seafloor can find them. The nervous system of the entire modern world is lying exposed in the dark. And one ship has spent the last 10 years tracing every strand of it. Her name is Yantar. To Russia, she is an oceanographic research vessel. To the navies of the West, she is one of the most closely watched spy ships on the planet. She entered service in May of 2015, a vessel just over 100 meters long, with a range of 8,000 nautical miles, able to stay at sea for 2 months at a time. And below her decks, she carries remotely operated mini-submarines, the kind capable of diving to 6,000 meters and, according to the United States Navy, severing cables far beneath the surface. What makes Yantar so unsettling is not any single act. It is the pattern. Follow her for a decade, and a map appears. In September of 2015, she was spotted off the coast of Guantanamo Bay. In 2017, she was active in the Eastern Mediterranean, lingering near an undersea cable linking Israel to Cyprus. In February of 2020, the Brazilian Navy found her sitting near the submarine cables off Rio de Janeiro, and when they approached, the crew evaded their questions and switched off the ship's identification systems, going dark. In the summer of 2021, she was off the coast of Ireland, tracing the exact route of a transatlantic cable and parking herself directly on top of it for most of a day. Not every voyage was sinister, and that is part of what makes her so difficult to pin down. In the summer of 2016, she sat anchored off Nuuk in Greenland. In late 2017, on a direct order from President Putin, she was sent racing across the Atlantic to the coast of Argentina to join the search for a lost submarine, the Ara San Juan, which had vanished with its entire crew. She has been used to recover secret equipment from Russian military aircraft that crashed into the sea. A research ship genuinely can do all of those things. That is exactly why a research ship is such a perfect disguise. Every honest, useful thing it does makes the other things easier to explain away. And it kept escalating. In September of 2023, while a Norwegian research ship was working in the Arctic, Yantar shadowed it for 16.5 hours straight, running without her identification signal, copying the other ship's every stop and turn, at one point closing to within 200 meters. The Norwegian Institute called it harassment. In late 2024, she was escorted out of the Irish Sea, in waters beneath which lie cables carrying data for Microsoft and Google. By early 2025, she was off the coast of Cornwall. Then came November of 2025, and the moment the quiet game became something close to open confrontation, Yantar entered British waters north of Scotland and came within 45 miles of the coast, allegedly mapping the undersea cables there. The Royal Navy sent a frigate and Royal Air Force patrol aircraft to track her. And in response, The crew of the Yantar reportedly aimed dazzling lasers directly at the British pilots, flying overhead a provocative, dangerous act against men in the cockpit of a plane. The British Defense Secretary went on the record with a message aimed straight at Vladimir Putin. "We see you," he said. "We know what you're doing, and if the Yantar travels south this week, we are ready." It was the second time that year the ship had pushed into British waters. Earlier, the Royal Navy had made the highly unusual decision to surface one of its own submarines directly in front of her, a silent way of saying, "We are here too." A ship that maps cables is a serious problem, but mapping is only reconnaissance. It tells you where to strike. And to make the threat real, to turn a map of the seafloor into a weapon, Russia built something whose only purpose is destruction on a scale that is hard to put into words. It was revealed almost by accident. On the 10th of November, 2015, during a televised meeting, a Russian state channel briefly showed a page of a secret document on screen. On that page was a weapon system with a codename, Status 6. The footage was quickly pulled, and Russia called it an accident, though the CIA later claimed the leak had been entirely deliberate, a message dressed up as a mistake. The world was looking at the first glimpse of the weapon now known as Poseidon. Poseidon is not a missile, and not quite a torpedo. It is best described as a giant, nuclear-powered, autonomous robot submarine, a drone that can drive itself across an entire ocean. It is reported to be around 24 meters long, with a titanium body powered by its own compact nuclear reactor, giving it a range of something like 10,000 kilometers. It does not need a crew. It does not need to come up for air. The idea is that it could be launched from a submarine, slip into the deep, and travel quietly for weeks toward an enemy's coastline, running slow and silent until the very last moment. And it carries a nuclear warhead. According to the estimates that have circulated, that warhead may be enormous. Some reports speculate as large as 100 megatons, a weapon of almost unimaginable destructive power, and one that falls outside every existing nuclear arms control treaty. There is even speculation that it could be designed as a radiological weapon engineered not just to destroy, but to contaminate, spreading radioactivity through the water and along the currents. Russia has said it wants around 30 of these machines, deployed on 4 submarines, split between its northern and Pacific fleets. And the 2 submarines built to carry them are names you have already heard: Belgorod, the Doomsday submarine, and Khabarovsk. The first Poseidon is expected to enter service around 2027. In October of 2025, Putin announced that the weapon had been successfully tested. There is one more feature of Poseidon that belongs in this story more than any other, because it quietly closes a circle. Alongside the version fired from a submarine, designers have reportedly patented a variant that does not need a submarine at all, one that can simply be placed on the seafloor, sealed inside a container, and left there, dormant, for as long as necessary, waiting to be woken. 2 Russian auxiliary ships with ice-strengthened hulls are said to be involved in testing it. Now hold that idea against everything you have heard. A nation that can map the seabed, reach it unseen, and work on it in the dark would also, in theory, be able to leave a weapon resting on the bottom indefinitely, a long way from home, ready. Whether they have ever actually done so is something no one outside the Kremlin can answer. Now, the Russians have made dramatic claims about what this thing could do. State television has said it could plunge Britain into the depths of the sea, and there have been claims that a Poseidon detonation could raise a tsunami 500 meters high. But here it is worth being careful, because this is where the propaganda runs ahead of the physics. Many analysts dismiss the giant tsunami claim. A natural tsunami funnels its energy along a single path, which is what makes it so destructive when it reaches shore. An underwater explosion sends its energy out in every direction at once, in a full circle, so the wave loses its power far more quickly as it spreads. To put the scale in perspective, the energy of the earthquake that caused the 2011 tsunami in Japan was around 163,000 times greater than the largest nuclear bomb ever detonated. A single weapon, however terrible, is not an earthquake. The 500-meter wave is almost certainly a story. The weapon itself is not. Which leaves the real question. Not what Russia could do at the bottom of the Atlantic, but what it may have already, silently, finished doing down there. To see the full board, you have to zoom out to a single stretch of ocean that has decided the fate of fleets for over a century. Between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, there is a corridor of open sea that strategists call the GIUK Gap. It is a choke point. For Russia's most powerful submarines, based up on the Kola Peninsula, it is the gateway to the wider Atlantic, the door they must pass through to reach the open ocean and, beyond it, the cables and the coastlines of the West. During the Cold War, NATO strung a chain of underwater listening posts right across this gap so that no Soviet submarine could slip through unheard. That same corridor is now the front line of a struggle almost no one can see. Because this is the genius and the danger of the whole strategy. None of it is technically an act of war. It has a name now: hybrid warfare. The idea is to do hostile things in a way that can always be denied, to sail a research ship over a cable, to send a submarine quietly past a coast, to do damage that no one can ever definitively prove you did. The clearest illustration is the destruction of the Nord Stream gas pipelines, an act of underwater sabotage that the whole world saw the aftermath of, and that to this day no one has been able to pin down with certainty. That ambiguity is not a side effect. It is the entire point, and the events keep coming. Around the same time as the Yantar standoff in November of 2025, the British revealed that 3 Russian submarines had conducted a covert operation over the cables and pipelines in the waters north of the United Kingdom. The way they did it tells you how deliberate this all is. One of the 3 was a powerful attack submarine, sent in, it appears, as a distraction, a loud, obvious target to draw the eye, while 2 of Gugi's specialized spy submarines did the real work over the cables. The Royal Navy tracked all 3, deploying a frigate, a support tanker, and anti-submarine helicopters, and openly dropping sonar buoys into the water so the Russians would know they had been seen. "We watched them," the Defense Secretary said. "Their secret operation had been exposed. The West has begun, slowly, to respond. Britain and Norway have signed a defense pact to hunt Russian submarines together and protect the infrastructure on the seabed. The Royal Navy has commissioned a new vessel built specifically for seabed warfare. There are old laws being dusted off. 2, an international cable convention dating all the way back to 1884, which Russia itself has signed, that allows navies to board and search ships suspected of tampering with undersea cables. But the deeper problem remains, and it is the one this entire story has been building toward. In peacetime, in international waters, there is very little anyone can legally do to stop a ship that is only, officially, conducting research. This is the quiet paradox at the heart of the whole confrontation. The law of the sea was written to protect the freedom of innocent passage, the right of any ship to move peacefully through another nation's waters. A research vessel mapping the seabed is, on paper, doing nothing wrong, even as it traces the exact wires that a future war would target. Western navies can shadow these ships. They can surface a submarine in front of them. They can drop sonar buoys to prove they are watching. What they cannot easily do, in peacetime, in open water, is make them stop. And so the 2 sides circle each other across the top of the Atlantic, one mapping, the other watching the mapping, neither willing to fire the first shot, both knowing exactly what is at stake on the floor below. So let's go back to where we started, at the bottom of the Atlantic, and ask the question one more time. What did Russia find down there? The answer turns out to depend entirely on when you ask it. Half a century ago, the honest answer was wonder. A hidden mountain range with more than 170 peaks, cities of fish in a place everyone had called a desert. A secret current born in Antarctica, crawling along the deepest floor of the ocean, quietly setting the temperature of half the North Atlantic and tugging at the climate of the world. For all our talk of conquering the deep, the truth is that the Russians, more than almost anyone, actually went and looked. And what they brought back filled 340 scientific papers with things no one had known were there. But the same expertise that found the fish learned to find the cables. The same machines that watched Grenadier in the dark were rebuilt to sit beside the wires that carry 99% of the world's data. The same nation that mapped a hidden current now maps a hidden battlefield, one we can only ever glimpse through a spy ship escorted out of the Irish Sea, a submarine surfacing in silent warning, a laser aimed at a pilot, a sonar buoy dropped into black water as a message that says, "We know you are down there." And that is the part we cannot answer. We know the maps have been made. We know the machines exist to reach the bottom and work there unseen. We do not know what, if anything, has already been left on the seafloor in the dark, what devices may be lying quietly beside a cable somewhere, waiting for a day that may never come. The deep Atlantic began as the largest blank space on every map we ever drew. We finally filled it in. And the picture that emerged is far stranger and far more fragile than the empty desert we once imagined, a thin web of light running through the cold, with something circling it, patient and very hard to see. We will find out what is down there eventually. We always do. The deep has never managed to keep its secrets forever. But for now, at the bottom of the Atlantic, in the dark, the most important question in the modern world is still waiting for an answer. And whoever reaches it first will have found something far more powerful than gold.